But we begin with our big story. The judge in Donald Trump's hush money trial denying a second motion for a mistrial. The former president leaving court this afternoon after the judge denied that motion and a push to loosen Trump's gag order in the case. The jury today heard testimony from more witnesses, including Stormy Daniels, who returned to the stand. Trump's lawyers grilling her in a heated cross-examination about her claims of a sexual encounter with Trump, the deal to keep her quiet, and even her strip club tour after she went public with her story. Trump denies the affair, but Daniels testified she is telling the truth, saying it has negatively impacted her life, forcing her to hire more security and move her daughter to a safer place to live. Joining me now for more is former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney Bernarda Villalona. Bernarda, thank you so much for being here. I want to get your immediate reaction to the news out tonight that former President Trump's legal team was denied that motion for a mistrial for the second time.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that Judge Merchan denied their motion for a mistrial, given that Judge Merchan had to find that there was undue prejudice and that undue prejudice had to deprive Donald Trump of a fair trial. Also, given that Judge Merchan even mentioned yesterday that the defense failed to make some objections when there was testimony that they should have objected to the point where Judge Merchan even objected himself and sustained his own objection to try to preserve the integrity of this trial. Also, the defense, doing cross-examination, opened up the door to some testimony that they didn't want to come in, but it came in on their questioning. So that would preclude them from getting a motion for a mistrial, given that they asked a question, and just because they didn't like the answer is not grounds for a motion for a mistrial to be granted.
So that means we are still moving forward here. Today we heard Trump's legal team try to really discredit Stormy Daniels, try to ask questions about if her story holds up. What do you make of that strategy from his legal team? And really, with keeping in mind that the crux of this case is about Trump falsifying business records, right?
Absolutely. So Stormy Daniels definitely brought a storm inside of that courtroom today. She was much stronger today during cross-examination than she was yesterday, especially given that today the focus was to try to discredit her in the sense that this sexual encounter did not take place, discredit her in terms of her inconsistent statements, and also discredit her because she has a bias and she has a motive in this case in terms of a money grab to make money off of this. So those were the strategy that the defense took. I don't think it was a strategy that was successful, especially I didn't like the fact that the defense kind of like shamed her, tried to shame like a sex worker. And I don't think that felt well with the jury, and they may hold that against the defense. But this is one of the defense's own making, because remember, doing opening statements, and they didn't have to give an opening statement, and they didn't have to go after Stormy Daniels in the opening statement, especially since she doesn't make out any of the falsifying business record charges. But because they said do an opening statements that they're going to prove or argue that Stormy Daniels is lying, that's why they had to take the chance of asking these questions and go after the sexual encounter itself, even though it's not a case about sex.
That's a great point, that they didn't have to go that route, but they chose to right off the bat in opening statements. Do you think the jury will sympathize at all with that argument that Daniels clearly profited off of telling her story, you know, something that they tried to make clear as they were trying to discredit her today, as Trump's team was?
So in terms of how the jury will accept it, whether they will credit her testimony, in the end, it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter because whether she had sex with Donald Trump or didn't doesn't make out the charges itself. So quite honestly, the prosecutor can just tell this jury, then closing arguments, look, you could put Stormy Daniels' story, her testimony aside, and determine the counts in this case and whether we prove in our case beyond a reasonable doubt by following this paper trail, by following Michael Cohen's testimony, by following David Pecker's testimony and Keith Davidson's testimony, because it all adds up that there was a story that had to be shut down in order to prevent any type of damage having to deal with the campaign or the election. And as a result of that, these falsifying business records came about because they had to hide what was done to try to save the election.
Bernarda, what do you make of some of the other testimony that we heard today? A former White House aide broke down on the witness stand, got emotional. What was the intention from the Trump legal team and that line of questioning toward her?
So, as you can see, that the other witnesses that testified after Stormy Daniels actually had more relevance than Stormy Daniels' testimony. They were actually more important. Is that what Trump's attorneys tried to do? Is that they tried to get the human side in terms of try to humanize Donald Trump, because these are people that are insiders of Donald Trump's camp, like they were close to Donald Trump. But also, what the prosecution did, which was key, why they called these witnesses: one, custodian of records; two, to lay out that the checks that were sent to the White House were returned signed by Donald Trump. And when they were returned signed by Donald Trump, they were also accompanied by invoices. And by using the witnesses to testify about Donald Trump's books in his own writing, in his own words, where he says he inspects every invoice, every check, because you have to, in order to be on top of your business, in order to be the big mogul that he was. So they're going to be able to tie all that together in the end. This last witness who testified, who actually did shed a tear, she was crucial in the sense that she gives you proximity to Donald Trump and where she was located within the White House, and also is able to say that, look, Michael Cohen did have a meeting at some point with Donald Trump, so does place him inside of the White House. So they got some crucial nuggets through these last witnesses today after Stormy Daniels.
And of course, we await the crucial witness, Michael Cohen, expected to be coming in the days, weeks ahead. Bernarda Villalona, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Let's bring the big story to our panel. Joining us today is ABC News contributor and op-ed columnist for the Los Angeles Times, Elsie Granderson, ABC News political contributor and former U.S. Senator from North Dakota, Heidi Heitkamp, Republican strategist and former Vivek Ramaswamy 2024 presidential campaign communications director, Tricia McLaughlin, and ABC News contributor and SiriusXM radio host, Mike Muse. Thank you all for being here. Mike, I'm going to start with you. Let's just take a step back here. And this is the second time the Stormy Daniels was on the stand. Combative, vivid, to say the least. How do you think this testimony is playing?
That's a really great question. I think as President Trump's defense attorneys was trying to discredit Stormy Daniels as much as possible, I thought that they actually endeared her to the jury. When you look at the round of questionings, in particular from today, it seemed very outdated line of questioning in the sense of this almost satirical nature and dismissive tone of the profession of an adult film star and of an exotic dancer. That is from a lens that seems very from 20 years ago, when it was very much taboo. When you look at where we are in 2024, whether or not you agree with the profession or not, there has become more of a normalization of that industry. And since there's more of a normalization of the industry, you've even seen, Josie, throughout the last couple of years, protests and advocates for sex workers' rights to take hold. And so this jury now is much more attuned to where we see adult film stars, where we see sex workers right now, and looked at her from a human perspective and looked at Stormy Daniels as someone who is being attacked based upon the tone. So I think I understand the defense's strategy of undermining her credibility, but I think they went too far with it. That could pose a risk to them when the jury begins to deliberate and really looks at the validity and credibility of Stormy Daniels' testimony.
Right. Well, when we think about those kind of credibility questions, Heidi, I want to bring you in here. Whatever the jury thinks, we did hear a lot of personal details about her and the former president. How do you think this plays for the former president politically? And why do you think that's part of why his team is asking for a mistrial and was, of course, denied tonight?
Well, his team forgot to object to this line of questioning when it happened on direct, and then on cross-examination went down the rabbit hole even further. And you have to wonder, who do they think the audience is? Because it's clearly not the jury, because all of this is probably not all that relevant, as your previous guest said, to actually proving the elements of this case. But this is explosive politically, and there's no doubt about it.
Well, that's a really interesting point, that the audience isn't the jury. Tricia, who is the audience here in this case?
Well, let's remember who called Stormy Daniels up to testify. It was not Donald Trump's camp, it was the prosecutors. And again, actually, to everyone on this panel's point, Stormy Daniels' testimony had nothing to do with the case. This case at its heart is a bookkeeping case that, beyond a reasonable doubt, Donald Trump falsified business records. So that actually lends to the credence of the Trump camp's point, which is that they should call for a mistrial. The salacious details that Stormy Daniels was really probed to give, really a play-by-play of the alleged sexual acts between them, was not only egregious and quite frankly nauseating, but it had nothing to do with the trial. And I mean, I think we could see a result down the line, much like Harvey Weinstein's conviction, which was overturned largely on this basis.
Well, LZ, weigh in here because, you know, this is likely one of the only of the 4 criminal cases the former president's facing to go to trial before the election. What do you think?
Well, I disagree with the idea that her testimony, Stormy Daniels' testimony, had absolutely nothing to do with this case because it proves a motive. It proves why Donald Trump may decide to do something like that. Everyone's uncomfortable about Stormy Daniels' testimony. What do you think the story was going to look like if it had actually gotten published? Do you think it would have been sanitized or do you think it would have been salacious? Which emphasizes the overall point. If Donald Trump is guilty of what he's accused of, he did not want the salacious information out there weeks before the election, particularly when he's trying to still woo over evangelical voters. And so it's important that when we talk about this case, that it's under the guise of the 2016 election, and that the testimony that we heard this week would have been a story in 2016 heading into the election, which, according to the prosecution, would have impacted the election, and that's the motive for why he allegedly falsified the information on the business records, was to protect that. That's an important part of this conversation, Elizabeth.
Right, we have heard the prosecution repeatedly tie those payments to the election and claim that it was interference with the 2016 election. LZ, Heidi, Trisha, Mike, we're going to have you guys stick around.